The rain had been falling for hours, drumming steadily against the rooftops of Willow Creek, a town where nights were usually quiet enough to hear the river flowing in the distance. That night, however, the silence was broken by a sudden burst of panic. At precisely 11:42 p.m., the emergency call center received a frantic report from a neighbor who had seen flickering lights in the Bennett home and heard what sounded like glass breaking. Minutes later, the narrow streets were alive with sirens. Paramedics and police officers rushed into the modest, two-story house at the end of Cedar Lane, unaware of the nightmare waiting inside. Upstairs, in the small bedroom painted pale blue, two children lay motionless under their blankets. Their faces were peaceful, almost as if they were asleep, but the chilling stillness in the air told a different story. In the master bedroom, their mother, Emily Bennett, was found sprawled on the floor beside her bed, blood pooling beneath her head. She was breathing, barely. There were no obvious signs of a break-in, the front door was locked, the windows unbroken. The house was eerily neat except for the scene upstairs, making the brutality of the attack even more haunting. The officers moved quickly, securing the area and calling for additional units, but there was nothing more that could be done for the children. Emily was rushed to St. Mary's Hospital, her survival uncertain. Outside, rain mixed with tears as neighbors huddled in shock, whispering in disbelief. For as long as anyone could remember, the Bennetts had been a loving, close-knit family. Now, their home had become the scene of an unthinkable crime, and the question that would haunt Willow Creek for years had already begun to take shape: who could have done something so monstrous? Emily's condition was critical, and within hours of her arrival at St. Mary's Hospital, she slipped into a deep coma. Doctors explained to investigators that there was no telling if or when she might wake. For detectives, this meant that the only surviving witness to the crime could not speak, and without her account, the case relied solely on physical evidence. The forensic team combed through every inch of the Bennett home. They examined door frames, window locks, and the edges of the carpeting, looking for anything disturbed. Nothing suggested a break-in. The kitchen counters were clean, the living room untouched, and even the children's rooms showed no signs of struggle. The crime scene felt deliberate, almost controlled, as if the person responsible had been in no hurry and had known exactly where to go. Investigators began compiling a list of potential suspects, starting with family members, close friends, and anyone who had recently visited the house. Interviews were conducted late into the night, but no one could offer a lead that pointed to a suspect. A few neighbors reported seeing a shadow moving past the upstairs window earlier that evening, but in the stormy darkness, no one could identify the figure. The autopsy results revealed that the children had died peacefully in their sleep from suffocation, leaving no defensive wounds behind. That detail disturbed the investigators most. It implied trust. Whoever committed the crime was likely someone the children knew and felt safe with. Despite weeks of effort, the investigation hit a wall. With no confession, no fingerprints, and no clear motive, the case began to cool. Emily lay silent in her hospital bed, unaware that the world outside was desperate for her to wake. The truth was locked away in her memory, and until she opened her eyes, it would remain hidden. 3 long years passed, and the Bennett case became one of Willow Creek's most haunting unsolved tragedies. Emily remained in the hospital, her days marked only by the rhythmic beeping of medical monitors and the gentle care of nurses who spoke to her in hopes that one day she might respond. Her room became a place of quiet sadness, decorated with photographs of her children and flowers from the few friends who still visited. Outside the hospital walls, life in Willow Creek moved on, but the shadow of that terrible night lingered. Parents locked their doors earlier, and children were kept closer to home. The Bennett house, once filled with laughter, was eventually put up for sale, but superstitious whispers kept buyers away. Detectives assigned to the case came and went, each reviewing the old files in search of something overlooked. The evidence, however, remained stubbornly thin: no DNA, no fingerprints, no weapon. Without new information, the police chief privately admitted the investigation had all but stalled. He kept the case folder on his desk as a reminder of unfinished business, but as the years passed, hope of solving it grew dim. Emily's parents had passed away, leaving her with no immediate family except for a few distant relatives who rarely visited. Some in town began to wonder if she would ever wake at all. Yet, There were those who believed that if she did open her eyes, she could end the silence once and for all. In the meantime, the Bennett tragedy faded from the headlines, becoming more of a grim local legend than an active investigation. But beneath the stillness, the truth remained, waiting patiently for the day when the only person who knew it could finally speak. On a quiet spring morning, when the hospital ward was unusually calm, Emily's eyes fluttered open. At first, the movement was so slight that the nurse on duty thought it was a trick of the light. But within moments, Emily's gaze began to focus, and her breathing shifted from the shallow rhythm of unconsciousness to something deliberate and aware. News of her awakening spread quickly through the hospital, drawing doctors, nurses, and even the police chief, who had never given up hope entirely. It was nothing short of a miracle. After 3 years trapped in silence, Emily Bennett had returned. In the days that followed, she regained strength slowly. At first, she could only process the present faces around her, the hum of machines, the view from her window. But soon, fragments of memory began to return, slipping into her thoughts like puzzle pieces finding their place. She remembered the feel of rain against the window that night, the soft breathing of her children as she checked on them before bed. Then, darker images emerged, a creak on the stairs, the faint smell of cigarette smoke, the weight of dread pressing down as she realized she wasn't alone. The memory grew sharper with each passing hour. She could see a shadow at the foot of her children's beds, unmoving, watching. Her mind fought against the recognition at first, unwilling to accept what it meant. But when the figure turned, just enough for the dim light to catch their face, the truth struck her with unbearable clarity. It wasn't a stranger who had invaded her home. It was someone she had known all her life, someone she had trusted completely. That moment of realization would change everything, shattering the fragile line between family and betrayal. When Emily was finally strong enough to speak for extended periods, detectives visited her hospital room, prepared for anything but the truth she was about to give them. In a steady but quiet voice, she recounted the events of that night in detail, every word carefully measured as though each one carried the weight of her children's memory. She named the person who had taken their lives, her own brother, Daniel Bennett. The detectives exchanged brief, stunned glances. Daniel had been interviewed early in the investigation but was quickly dismissed due to his outward grief and lack of direct evidence against him. Now, Emily's testimony cast everything they thought they knew into doubt. With her statement as the catalyst, the cold case reignited. Detectives began to dig into Daniel's life during the months before the murders. What they found was a trail of financial ruin, gambling debts, unpaid loans, and a desperate attempt to secure money from a family inheritance Emily had refused to share until their parents' estate was fully settled. The motive became painfully clear. Armed with this new perspective, investigators revisited the crime scene photos, reanalyzed fingerprints, and even found a partial shoe print in the upstairs hallway that matched a pair Daniel still owned. Daniel was arrested quietly at his small apartment across town. In court, the evidence painted a grim picture, but it was Emily's testimony that left the jury with no doubt. She described not only the sight of her brother standing over her children but also the crushing betrayal she felt in that moment. The guilty verdict brought an end to the legal battle, but for Emily, justice was bittersweet. She had emerged from 3 years of darkness to reveal the truth, only to confront the reality that the man who destroyed her family was the one who had once shared her childhood home.